Commander Veltar dragged his broken leg across the smooth crystal floor of the Dominion High Command. Each step sent sharp pain through his damaged exoskeleton, but he pushed forward anyway. The gleaming walls reflected his scarred face, reminding him of battles he wished he could forget. 3 long years had passed since the human war ended, yet every night brought the same terrifying dreams. The massive doors to the debriefing chamber slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, dozens of young Dominion officers sat around a circular table, their bright eyes fixed on holographic displays floating above them. The images showed human colonies scattered across distant worlds, small, simple buildings made of metal and concrete. Nothing impressive about them at all. Lieutenant Chixara, barely out of the academy, pointed at one of the settlements with her clawed finger. "Look at these pathetic structures," she laughed, her voice echoing in the chamber. "These humans can barely build proper shelters. They still use chemical rockets to reach orbit. No plasma shields, no energy weapons, nothing advanced at all. How did such primitive creatures hold off our entire fleet for 2 whole years?" Other young officers nodded in agreement, chattering among themselves. They had studied the war records, read the official reports, but none of them had actually fought against humans. To them, it was just another campaign, another victory for the mighty Dominion. Veltar limped to his assigned seat, his mechanical leg whirring softly with each movement. The sound made several officers turn to look at him. They had heard stories about the veteran commander, whispers about what happened to him during the final battle at Kepler Station. But seeing him in person, with his missing arm and cybernetic implants, made the war suddenly feel real. Commander Veltar called out. "Captain Zorthok," from across the room. "You led the assault on the human mining colonies. Surely you can explain how we managed to defeat such a weak species so quickly?" Veltar's compound eyes darkened, changing from bright blue to deep purple. The room fell quiet as he slowly reached for the neural interface built into his skull. His clawed fingers found the connection port and inserted a data cable. "You want to know about the humans?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You think they were weak?" The holographic displays flickered and changed. Instead of peaceful colony images, the room filled with scenes of destruction and chaos. Burning starships floated in space, their hulls torn open like flowers. Dominion soldiers lay scattered across asteroid surfaces, their advanced armor cracked and useless. "Let me show you what really happened out there," Veltar said, his voice growing stronger. "Let me tell you about the humans I fought against. About Deho, a simple mining foreman who turned Asteroid Base 7 into an impregnable fortress. About Hyjin, a medical officer who saved 300 civilians while our bombardment ships rained death from above." A new image appeared in the center of the room. It showed a human male, his face covered in dirt and dried blood. His clothes were torn and burned, but his eyes blazed with determination. Behind him stood a massive Dominion war machine, its plasma. Cannons aimed directly at his chest, yet the human didn't move, didn't run, didn't beg for mercy. "This is Deho," Veltar continued, pointing at the figure. "When we attacked his mining station, he had 43 workers under his command. No soldiers, no weapons, just ordinary people trying to make a living digging rocks out of asteroids. Our intelligence said the base would fall in 6 hours. It took us 40 days. Lieutenant Chixara leaned forward, her earlier confidence fading. "How is that possible? Our quantum scanners showed no military installations, no defense systems." Veltar's mandibles clicked together in what might have been a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "That's because you don't understand humans. You don't need fancy weapons to be dangerous." This mining foreman took industrial equipment and turned it into instruments of war. Our processors became missile launchers. Drilling lasers became sniper rifles. Even their waste recycling systems were converted into chemical weapon dispensers. The hologram shifted to show the interior of the mining station. Crude barricades made from metal plates blocked every corridor. Humans in mining suits crouched behind makeshift cover, clutching weapons that looked like they had been built in a workshop. Their faces showed no fear, only grim determination. "But that wasn't the worst part," Veltar whispered, his voice making everyone in the room lean closer. "The worst part was how they fought together. When we destroyed their communication systems, they used hand signals. We jammed their electronics. They tapped messages through the metal walls. It was like fighting a single organism with 43 bodies. The young officers stared at the images in shocked silence. This wasn't the easy victory they had been taught about in the academy. This looked like a nightmare. "This is what we underestimated," Veltar said, his scarred face reflecting the holographic light. "We thought we were fighting primitives. Instead, we found something far more dangerous. Creatures who refused to give up, no matter what the odds." Veltar's eyes grew distant as he accessed deeper memory files. The holographic display around them shifted, showing the vast emptiness of space filled with floating mining platforms. Structure looked tiny against the backdrop of stars, connected by thin transport tubes that sparkled in the distant sunlight. "Our intelligence division had spent months studying human technology," Veltar said, his voice taking on a bitter edge. Every report said the same thing. Humans were barely evolved beyond their primitive ancestors. They used gunpowder weapons while we had plasma cannons. They flew around in metal tubes while we commanded ships that could bend space itself. The computer models predicted total victory in 72 hours. Lieutenant Chixara shifted uncomfortably in her seat. But the official records showed the asteroid belt campaign lasted for months. For months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, Veltar corrected, his mechanical fingers drumming against the table. "I remember every single day because each one brought new horrors we never expected." The hologram zoomed in on one of the mining platforms, showing its industrial equipment in detail. Massive drilling arms extended from the central hub, while cargo containers moved along automated tracks. It looked peaceful, almost boring. "This was mining platform Sigma 7, Veltar continued. It's home to 230 human workers, led by a supervisor named Sol Young. She was a small female, barely reaching my shoulder, with graying hair and calloused hands. Our psychological profiles said she would surrender immediately when faced with superior force." The scene changed, showing the same platform surrounded by Dominion warships. Their sleek hulls gleamed with advanced armor plating, while weapon ports glowed with charged energy. "It should have been over in minutes. We sent the standard surrender demand," Veltar explained. "Expected immediate compliance. Instead, Young transmitted a single-word response that our translators had trouble understanding. She said no." The holographic mining platform suddenly came alive with activity. The drilling arms swiveled toward the Dominion ships, their industrial lasers charging with deadly energy. Cargo containers launched from the transport tubes like missiles, filled with explosive mining charges. In 30 seconds, that mining supervisor had turned her entire facility into a weapons platform, Veltar said, his voice filled with grudging admiration. The drilling lasers weren't designed for combat, but they cut through our forward scout ships like they were made of paper. The cargo launchers peppered our hulls with improvised explosives that our shields couldn't deflect because they registered as industrial debris. Young Officer Tixwell raised her hand nervously. "But surely our advanced targeting systems could handle such crude weapons." Veltar's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. "That's what we thought too, till Young started using the waste recycling system as a chemical weapon launcher. Do you know what human industrial waste looks like when it freezes in space and gets accelerated to combat velocity? It becomes a cloud of razor-sharp projectiles that our sensors can't track because they're organic compounds." The hologram showed Dominion fighters swarming around the mining platform, their elegant forms dodging clouds of frozen debris. Several ships spun out of control as their hulls were punctured by chunks of recycled material moving at incredible speeds. But the real shock came when we tried to disrupt their coordination. Veltar continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. We jammed their radio frequencies, scrambled their computer networks, even deployed quantum interference fields. That should have made electronic communication impossible. The display showed human figures moving through the mining tunnels inside the asteroid. They wore bulky environmental suits and carried primitive handheld radios, but the devices were obviously not working. Instead of panicking, they adapted, Veltar said. Young had her people use handheld mirrors to flash light signals between platforms. When we used our ships to block the light, they started tapping messages through the metal walls using mining hammers. The sound waves traveled through the solid rock faster than our jamming systems could follow. Officer Chixara leaned forward, fascination replacing her earlier skepticism. They were communicating through the asteroids themselves. More than that, Veltar replied. They were thinking like a single organism. When Platform Sigma 7 came under direct attack, workers on Platform Sigma 12, 50 kilometers away, immediately began preparing support fire. They knew what Sa Young needed before she could even ask for it. The hologram shifted to show a human male with short black hair and intelligent eyes. He wore a mining engineer's jumpsuit covered in tools and explosive devices. "This is Geneseo," Veltar said, pointing at the figure. He was supposedly just an explosives expert, responsible for blasting new mining tunnels. But when the war started, he became something far more dangerous. The scene changed to show the interior of an asteroid, where Geneseo was placing charges along carefully calculated points in the rock walls. His movements were precise, almost surgical, as he wired together a network of explosives that ran through kilometers of tunnel. Geneseo spent 3 days turning the entire asteroid into a single massive bomb, Veltar explained. But he didn't detonate it when our ships got close. He waited. He let us land troops, let us think we were winning, let us bring more ships into range. The hologram showed Dominion soldiers advancing through the mining tunnels, their advanced armor gleaming under artificial lights. They moved confidently, expecting easy victory against primitive humans. We lost the destroyers Crimson Dawn, Stellar Pride, and Quantum Storm in the explosion that followed, Veltar said quietly. Geneseo had calculated the exact moment when our forces would be most vulnerable. The asteroid didn't just explode, it became a directed weapon that launched chunks of rock the size of buildings directly at our fleet. The display showed the devastating explosion from space, a brilliant flash that illuminated the surrounding asteroids like a new star. Debris fields spread outward in perfectly calculated patterns, catching the Dominion ships in a deadly crossfire of stone and metal. That's when we realized the horrible truth, Veltar concluded, his compound eyes reflecting the holographic light. The humans weren't defending their mining platforms. They were using them as bait, drawing us into carefully prepared traps. Every victory we thought we had won was actually another step into their web. Veltar's entire body began to shake as he accessed the most painful memories stored in his neural implant. The holographic display around them transformed into a massive orbital structure, its metal framework stretching for kilometers in every direction. Kepler Station hung in the void like a mechanical spider, its docking arms reaching out toward the stars. "This was supposed to be our greatest victory," Veltar whispered, his voice barely audible in the silent chamber. Kepler Station was the humans' most important research facility in the outer system. Intelligence reports said it housed their best scientists, their most advanced technology. High Command wanted it captured intact. The hologram zoomed closer, showing the station's details. Multiple levels of laboratories, living quarters, and industrial sections were connected by a maze of corridors and transport tubes. Docking bays jutted out from the main structure like metal flowers, each one capable of holding dozens of ships. "We surrounded them with our entire third fleet," Veltar continued, his mechanical arm gesturing toward the display. 50 battleships, 100 destroyers, countless fighter squadrons. The humans had no warships, no defense platforms, nothing but the station itself. 200 civilians against 10,000 of our finest warriors. Lieutenant Chixara stared at the overwhelming display of Dominion firepower. How could they possibly resist such force? Veltar's compound eyes darkened to deep purple, because they had something we didn't understand. They had Gildong. The hologram shifted to show a human male in his middle years, wearing a simple maintenance uniform covered in grease stains. His hair was thinning, his face lined with years of hard work, and his hands were calloused from handling tools. He looked like any ordinary worker, not a military commander. Gildong was the station's chief engineer, Veltar explained. He had spent 15 years maintaining every system, knowing every pipe, every wire, every weakness in the structure. When our fleet arrived, the other humans wanted to evacuate. Gildong convinced them to stay and fight. The scene changed to show the interior of Kepler Station during the first day of the siege. Humans were running through corridors, carrying supplies and equipment. But instead of panic, there was organized purpose in their movements. Gildong stood in the central command center, pointing at holographic schematics while giving calm instructions. In 6 hours, he had transformed a research station into a fortress, Veltar said, his voice filled with grudging respect. The docking bays were sealed and booby-trapped. Outer corridors became maze-like death traps filled with improvised explosives. The life support systems were modified to create poison gas in specific sections. The hologram showed Dominion assault troops in full combat armor advancing through station corridors. Their energy weapons glowed with deadly power. Their shields shimmered with protective force fields. They moved with the confidence of warriors who had never known defeat. Breached the outer hall on day 3, Veltar continued. Our plasma cutters carved through their metal walls like they were made of paper. The first wave of troops entered expecting quick victory. Instead, they found hell. The display showed the same corridors, but now they were filled with smoke and debris. Hidden explosives detonated as the Dominion soldiers advanced, sending shrapnel flying in all directions. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, trapping attackers in sealed compartments that slowly filled with toxic gas. Gildong had turned the station's own systems against us, Veltar explained. The artificial gravity generators created crushing fields. That flattened our troops. The fire suppression system sprayed liquid nitrogen instead of foam, freezing our soldiers solid. Even the cleaning robots were modified to carry explosives. Officer Tixwell raised her hand nervously. But surely our advanced armor protected your forces? Veltar's mandibles clicked bitterly. Our armor was designed to stop energy weapons and shrapnel. It wasn't designed to handle a medical officer performing surgery with a plasma cutter while under direct fire. The hologram showed a human female with short black hair tied back in a practical ponytail. She wore a blood-stained medical uniform and worked frantically over an injured human on a makeshift operating table. Around her, the walls shook with explosions while sparks fell from damaged ceiling panels. This is Jiwoo, Veltar said, pointing at the figure. She was the station's chief medical officer, trained to heal, not to fight. But when our bombardment started, she became something else entirely. The scene showed Jiwoo using a mining laser as a surgical tool, carefully removing shrapnel from a wounded human's chest while Dominion plasma bolts seared the air around her. Her hands never shook, her concentration never wavered, even as the station shuddered under enemy fire. She performed over 200 surgeries during the siege, Veltar continued. When her proper medical equipment was destroyed, she used whatever she could find. Welding torches became cauterization tools. Industrial adhesives became surgical glue. She saved lives with spare parts and determination. The hologram shifted to show the humans' living conditions as the siege continued. Their food supplies were running dangerously low, forcing them to consume things never meant for human digestion. By day 20, they had eaten all their stored food, Veltar explained. So they started eating the station's biofilters, the organic compounds used to clean the air. When those ran out, they consumed the algae from the water recycling systems. They were literally eating their own life support to stay alive. The display showed humans sharing tiny portions of green paste, their faces gaunt with hunger, but their eyes still burning with determination. Children sat next to adults, all of them accepting their meager rations without complaint. By day 35, their water recyclers had failed under the constant bombardment, Veltar continued, his voice growing even quieter. So they mixed engine coolant with their own blood to create a liquid they could drink. The coolant was toxic, slowly poisoning them. But it kept them alive long enough to keep fighting. Lieutenant Chixara looked horrified. They were killing themselves just to resist a few more days? That's what we thought too, Veltar replied. We expected them to surrender any moment. Instead, they got more dangerous as they got weaker. Desperation made them creative in ways our strategists couldn't predict. The hologram showed the final assault on day 47. Dominion troops in powered armor smashed through the last barriers, expecting to find broken, defeated humans ready to surrender. Instead, they found something that would haunt Veltar's dreams forever. When we finally breached the station's core, We found 17 humans still alive, he whispered. They had no weapons left, no equipment, nothing but their bare hands, an absolute refusal to give up. Ildong was among them, his maintenance. Uniform torn and bloody, but he was still giving orders to defend their position. The final image showed these last defenders, their faces skeletal with starvation, their bodies covered in wounds, but their eyes still blazing with defiant fury. They charged at the heavily armored Dominion troops with nothing but their fingernails and teeth, fighting like wild animals protecting their young. It took us 3 more hours to subdue those 17 humans, Veltar concluded, his voice breaking. 3 hours to capture starving, wounded, weaponless creatures who should have died weeks earlier. And in those 3 hours, they killed 43 more of our soldiers. The chamber fell into complete silence as the hologram faded. The young officers stared at Veltar with new understanding. Finally beginning to grasp what they had really faced in the human war, Veltar's exoskeleton plates began to rattle against each other, creating a sound like wind chimes in a storm. His compound eyes had turned almost black, and several officers noticed that his remaining natural arm was trembling uncontrollably. The veteran commander was reliving his worst nightmare. The Battle of Proxima Drift was supposed to be the final. Engagement, Veltar began, his voice hollow and distant. Our entire war fleet had gathered in the system, ready to crush the last human resistance. At the center of our formation was the pride of the Dominion Navy, the Eternal Dominance. The holographic display expanded to show a massive warship that dwarfed everything around it. The dreadnought stretched for 40 kilometers from bow to stern, its hull bristling with thousands of weapon ports. Energy shields shimmered around its surface like a protective bubble, while smaller escort ships orbited it like planets around a star. I was serving as tactical coordinator aboard. The flagship, Veltar continued, his mechanical fingers tapping nervously on the table. The ship was a marvel of Dominion engineering. Triple-layered quantum armor, automated defense turrets that could track and destroy targets smaller than a grain of sand, environmental systems that could support 50,000 crew members for decades without resupply. Lieutenant Chixara studied the massive vessel with amazement. How could anything threaten such a ship? It's larger than most space stations. Veltar's mandibles clicked together in a sound that might have been bitter laughter. That's exactly what we thought. Our intelligence reports showed the humans had no capital ships, no heavy weapons capable of penetrating our shields. We were invincible, or so we believed. The hologram shifted to show the space around the Dominion fleet. At first glance, it appeared empty except for debris from earlier battles. But then the view zoomed in on what looked like floating wreckage. Pieces of destroyed human ships drifting silently through the void. The attack began at 0347 ship time, Veltar said, his voice becoming more precise as he recalled the exact details. Our sensors detected no incoming missiles, no energy signatures, nothing that registered as a threat. The first sign of trouble came when Maintenance Chief Cravill reported unusual vibrations in the outer hull. The display showed the interior of the Eternal Dominance, its corridors bustling with activity as crew members went about their duties. The ship's artificial gravity kept everyone walking normally. Holographic displays showed tactical information from across the fleet. At first, we thought it was just space debris hitting our shields, Veltar continued. But the vibrations were too regular, too purposeful. That's when Chief Engineer Zix Mora made a discovery that chilled us all to the core. The scene changed to show a Dominion engineer examining a section of the ship's outer hull. Through the transparent aluminum viewports, she could see something that shouldn't have been possible. Human figures in bulky pressure suits walking across the ship's surface, their magnetic boots allowing them to move against the hull like insects crawling on a wall. There were 12 of them, Veltar said, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. 12 humans in primitive EVA suits carrying nothing but basic cutting tools and personal equipment. They had somehow crossed the void between their destroyed ships and our flagship without being detected by our sensors. The hologram zoomed in on one of the figures. It was a human female, her face visible through the transparent helmet of her pressure suit. She had short black hair and determined eyes, and she moved with the confidence of someone who had done this kind of work before. Their leader was named Yunyang, Veltar explained. Our intelligence files said she was a former cargo pilot, someone who had spent years moving freight between space stations. She wasn't a soldier, wasn't trained for combat, but she understood something about space travel that our strategists had never considered. The display showed Union directing her team as they placed small cutting charges against specific points on the ship's hull. Each charge was precisely positioned, targeting weak points in the armor that only someone with intimate knowledge of starship construction would know about. She knew that even the strongest ship has vulnerable spots, Veltar continued. Sensor, arrays, communication, relays, life support intakes, all the little openings that a ship needs to function. In 30 minutes, her team had cut through our outer defenses and entered the ship's internal systems. The scene shifted to show the interior of the Eternal Dominance as alarms began to sound. Red warning lights flashed throughout the corridors, while automated announcements echoed from the walls, but the humans were already inside. Moving through maintenance shafts and service tunnels that most crew members didn't even know existed, they moved like ghosts, Veltar said, his voice filled with fear even years later. Our internal sensors couldn't track them because they generated no energy signatures, no powered weapons, no electronic equipment, just biological organisms. Moving through our ship like a virus through a bloodstream, the hologram showed Dominion security teams rushing through corridors, their weapons charged and ready. But every time they reached a reported sighting, they found nothing but empty spaces and the lingering smell of human sweat. The first deaths happened in the environmental control section, Veltar continued, his mechanical arm clenching into a fist. We found 6 crew members dead, their bodies arranged in a pattern that spelled out words in human writing. The message was simple: you should have stayed home. The display showed the gruesome scene, with Dominion corpses positioned to form letters on the deck. The sight was so disturbing that several young officers in the debriefing chamber looked away. But that was just the beginning, Veltar said, his voice becoming even more strained. Yunyang had divided her team into pairs, each group targeting a different system. They used our own ship against us, flooding sections with industrial coolant, overloading power relays, even reprogramming the food dispensers to release toxic compounds. The hologram showed human figures crawling through ventilation shafts, their movements coordinated with mechanical precision. They carried simple tools, wrenches, cutting torches, explosive charges, but they used them with devastating effectiveness. In 3 hours, they had disabled our main weapons array, Veltar continued. In 4 hours, they had taken control of our life support systems. By hour 5, they were hunting our crew through the corridors like predators stalking prey. The scene showed Dominion officers barricading themselves in their quarters, while human voices echoed through the ship's communication system. The voices were calm, almost friendly, as they announced their progress through the vessel. The worst part was the psychological warfare, Veltar said, his compound eyes reflecting the holographic light. They would leave bodies in specific locations, arranged to send messages. They would play recordings of our own crew members screaming through the ship's speakers. They turned our own sanctuary into a house of horrors. The hologram displayed the ship's reactor core, a massive chamber filled with swirling energy that powered the entire vessel. Standing in the center of the chamber was Yunyang, her pressure suit now removed to reveal a simple jumpsuit underneath. She was placing a device against one of the reactor's control panels. We finally tracked her down. She was in the reactor core, Veltar concluded, his voice breaking completely. She had built a fusion charge using components from our own power cells. When our security team surrounded her, she looked at us and smiled. Then she said something that haunts me to this day. The image of Union turned toward the camera, her face calm despite being surrounded by enemy soldiers. Her lips moved, speaking words that the translation system rendered in glowing text above her head. She said, "Thank you for bringing your ship close enough to our world. This explosion will be visible from the surface. My people will know that even your greatest weapon can be destroyed by ordinary humans with extraordinary courage." The hologram flashed white as the fusion charge detonated, and then everything went dark. When the lights returned, Veltar sat slumped in his chair. His mechanical systems worried softly as they worked to keep him stable. 12 humans, he whispered. 12 ordinary people with cutting tools and magnetic boots brought down the most powerful warship in the galaxy. And they did it with a smile. Veltar's remaining organic eye began to leak a clear fluid, the Dominion equivalent of tears. His mechanical systems hummed quietly as they struggled to process the emotional overload of his memories. The holographic displays around the chamber flickered and dimmed, as if even the technology couldn't bear to show what came next. The military defeat was just the beginning, Veltar said, his voice barely audible above the chamber's ventilation systems. What happened afterward was far worse than losing battles. We captured thousands of human prisoners during the final months of the war, thinking we could extract information about their weaknesses, their strategies, their plans. The hologram shifted to show a massive Dominion prison ship floating in deep space. The vessel was designed like a fortress with multiple layers of security barriers and guard stations. Energy fields crackled between the outer hull and inner containment areas, creating an impenetrable cage for dangerous captives. The Infinite Justice was our most secure detention facility, Veltar continued, gesturing toward the ship. It could hold 50,000 prisoners in complete isolation, monitored by automated systems and staffed by our most experienced interrogators. We brought the human leaders there, expecting them to break within days. The scene changed to show the interior of the prison ship. Long corridors lined with individual cells stretched in every direction, each one containing a human prisoner. The cells were small, barely large enough for their occupants to lie down, with force fields instead of doors and constant surveillance cameras recording every movement. Among the prisoners was a human named Taman, Veltar said, pointing to one particular cell. Inside sat a middle-aged human male with graying hair and kind eyes. Despite being imprisoned, he sat calmly on his narrow bunk, looking more like a teacher than a dangerous enemy combatant. Bint had been their chief negotiator. During the peace talks, Veltar explained, we captured him during the Titan offensive, expecting him to reveal military secrets or beg for his life. Instead, he did something that changed everything. The hologram zoomed in on the cell, showing Timon as a Dominion guard approached to deliver his daily ration. The human looked up with genuine interest, as if he were meeting a friend rather than his captor. He started talking, Veltar said simply, not demanding better treatment or protesting his imprisonment. He just talked. About the weather on his home planet, about the flowers his daughter liked to pick in their garden, about the way sunrise looked from his kitchen window. The display showed the guard, a young Dominion soldier named Kickstel, stopping to listen despite his training. Something in the human's voice, the warmth and genuine emotion, made him pause his routine duties. Within a week, Guard Kickstel was spending extra time at Taman's cell, Veltar continued. The human would ask about Kickstel's family, his home world, his dreams for the future. Simple questions that no one had ever asked a common soldier before. The scene expanded to show other guards gathering around Taman's cell during their breaks. The human spoke softly about concepts that had no translation in Dominion language. Concepts like personal choice, individual dignity, the right to pursue happiness. The prison ship's chief interrogator, Commander Vexinar, tried traditional methods first, Veltar explained, as the hologram showed a sterile interrogation room. Pain inducers, neural scramblers, psychological pressure. But Taman just smiled and asked about Vexinar's childhood, whether he had ever wanted to be something other than a soldier. The display showed the interrogator's growing confusion as his techniques failed completely. Instead of breaking down, the human prisoner seemed genuinely concerned about his captor's well-being, asking questions that made Vexinar think about things he had never considered before. By the end of the first month, 3 interrogators had requested transfers off the prison ship, Veltar said, his voice growing more troubled. They claimed the human was using some kind of mental manipulation, but psychological scans showed no evidence of telepathic influence. Taman was just being human. The hologram shifted to show the prison ship's common areas, where off-duty guards would gather to discuss their work. But instead of talking about military matters, they were asking strange questions. Questions about freedom, about choice, about whether following orders was always the right thing to do. The infection spread faster than we could contain it, Veltar continued, using the clinical term that Dominion Command had applied to the phenomenon. Guards began treating prisoners like individuals rather than enemy assets. They started sharing their own food rations, providing extra medical care, even allowing prisoners to communicate with each other. The scene showed Dominion soldiers sitting outside human cells, listening to stories about Earth, about families, about hopes and dreams that had nothing to do with war. The rigid military discipline that had defined their service for years was slowly crumbling. Within 6 months, the entire crew of the Infinite Justice was compromised. Veltar said, his mechanical arm clenching. They weren't following human orders or betraying military secrets. They were just thinking for themselves for the first time in their lives. The hologram displayed protests on Dominion worlds, showing crowds of citizens holding signs written in both Dominion script and human languages. The messages were simple but revolutionary. Freedom for all, choose your own path, individual lives matter. The idea spread beyond the prison ships, Veltar explained, his voice filled with a mixture of fear and wonder. Dominion citizens, who had never met a human, began questioning the war, questioning the government, questioning everything they had been taught about duty and obedience. The display showed Dominion families gathering in their homes, having conversations that would have been unthinkable before the human contact. Parents asking their children what they wanted to be when they grew up, rather than simply assigning them roles based on genetic markers and social class. High Command tried to suppress the information, but it was too late, Veltar continued. The concept of individual choice was spreading through our society like wildfire. Citizens began refusing military service, questioning government orders, even demanding representation in political decisions. The scene shifted to show the Dominion High Council in emergency session, their members arguing frantically about how to contain the human influence. But even among the highest levels of government, some voices were beginning to ask whether the humans might have a point about freedom and self-determination. That's when the decision was made to withdraw, Veltar said, his voice becoming quiet and reflective. Not because we couldn't defeat the humans militarily, but because defeating them would have required destroying everything we had become as a society. We couldn't win without becoming the very thing we claimed to be fighting against. The hologram showed Dominion fleets pulling back from human space, their retreat covered by propaganda claiming victory. But the truth was more complex. They were fleeing from an idea that threatened to transform their entire civilization. I remember the last human I spoke to before the withdrawal, Veltar said, his compound eyes focusing on a distant memory. Her name was Salman, and she was scheduled for execution as a war criminal. When I asked her why humans fought so hard, for such a hopeless cause, she smiled and gave me an answer I'll never forget. The hologram showed a human female with short hair and calm eyes, standing in an execution chamber, but showing no fear. Her voice carried clearly through the chambers. Speakers, as she spoke her final words, she said, "Ideas are bulletproof, Commander. You can destroy our bodies, conquer our worlds, even wipe out our entire species. But the idea that every thinking being deserves to choose their own destiny, that will survive long after we're gone," Veltar stood slowly, his mechanical leg worry as it supported his weight. Around the chamber, the young officers sat in stunned silence, their minds struggling to process everything they had heard. That was 3 years ago, Veltar concluded, gathering his files with trembling hands. And she was right. Even now, even here in the heart of Dominion space, citizens are asking questions about freedom, about choice, about what it means to truly live. The human infection is spreading, and there's no cure for hope. As he moved toward the chamber's exit, Veltar could hear whispers starting among the junior officers. Questions about individual rights, about personal freedom, about whether following orders was always the moral choice. The very ideas that had destroyed the Dominion certainty were taking root in a new generation. Lieutenant Chixara called out as he reached the door. "Commander, what should we do if we encounter humans again?" Veltar paused, his scarred face turning back toward the young officers. "Pray that you're strong enough to resist becoming better than you are," he said quietly, "because that's what they do to you. They make you want to be human." The door sealed behind him with a soft hiss. leaving the chamber in silence. But the silence didn't last long. Soon, voices began to rise as the officers discussed what they had heard, asking questions that their training had never prepared them to answer. In the corridors beyond, Veltar limped toward his quarters, listening to the sound of a civilization beginning to change. Perhaps, he thought to himself, Soman had been right about more than just the power of ideas. Perhaps some changes were worth the price of uncertainty. Behind him, the future of the Dominion hung in the balance, teetering between the rigid certainty of the past and the dangerous freedom of choice. The humans had won their war without firing a final shot, not through superior weapons or tactics, but through the simple act of being themselves. And in the end, that had been more than enough. The end.